High school English classes. We all had them. We all had mixed feelings. But if any of you had an experience similar to mine, you were 17 years old, you'd never been more confused or depressed in your life, and then your English teacher handed you a copy of Hamlet. This experience changed me. It altered my brain chemistry in a way that was completely irreversible. Some kids, they had an emo phase. I had a Hamlet phase. And quite frankly, that's more embarrassing. You can grow out of an emo phase. You become a Hamlet phase. I mostly loved this play because of Ophelia. I fell in love with her in, I think, every sense of the word. And I was convinced that she was actually secretly the smartest person in this play. And really, I'm still convinced of that. If you listen to her monologue with the flowers and read between the lines just a little, it's clearly indicative of something being up that Ophelia knows about. And a lot of people clearly feel the same way about Ophelia, as most spin-off material tends to focus on the character herself. And the more spin-off material comes out, the more people like Ophelia, and the more spin-off material we get. Most of these spin-offs or parodies, adaptations, whatever you want to call them, tend to give Ophelia's power back to her, which makes it that much more enjoyable. I think the hardest part of the play of Hamlet for most of us is seeing this poor young woman whose life is essentially completely taken away from her. And the more we learn about Ophelia, the more my desire to either save her or be her grows. Perhaps my projection onto this character is indicative of a much deeper psychological issue, but therapy's expensive, so I'm doing this instead. I think I grew a little cocky with my Hamlet expertise, to the point of telling my English teacher that she was wrong about certain things. And she was. But beyond that, I was convinced that I could fix the plot of Hamlet with one or two simple tweaks. That all I had to do was sort things out with a few people, actually communicate, and probably kill a man, and then boom, plot solved, everyone lives. Luckily, I was given the chance to not only test my skills, but live my Ophelia fantasy. Golden Glitch released a point-and-click adventure game in 2019 titled Elsinore. In the game, you play as Ophelia, who, after the initial run-through of the plot, wakes up again on the first day to Hamlet barging into her room and being all around nuts. And she realizes she is trapped in a time loop in which she has to live these same events over and over again, unless she can manipulate them and fix them. This was it. This was my chance. This was my chance to prove my Hamlet expertise and fix the plot. All I needed was an indie video game. For starters, this game is amazing just on its own. It changes the original plot in such a way that it doesn't stray away from the source material too much, but it does change it. For instance, both Laertes and Ophelia are mixed race, as their mother was a black woman. And this blends really well into the story. It just adds another layer to this idea that Polonius's children, they just don't really belong in court. It also kind of isolates Polonius, as he fell in love with a woman who was far below his station. The game also changes or canonizes a lot of things that just give the characters a little more oomph. For example, Horatio is explicitly, canonically, as in, hooked up with Hamlet in college. Hamlet got over it, he didn't. In love with Hamlet. This is what the people have wanted for centuries. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are also women of color, no less. Guildenstern also had an affair with Hamlet. Hamlet really just got around. I don't know why. And the captain of the guard, Bernardo, is heavily implied to be some sort of gender fluid, as he performs as a woman in plays and says that he feels much more comfortable when he's allowed to express the gender that he's feeling inside. We learn a lot more about the King Hamlet, Claudius Gertrude relationship, as well as how it was impacted by the relationships of monarchs who came before them. Spoiler alert, it's always been this messy. We also have a completely original character, Lady Brit, and she's the girl who the nobility is like, this is who Prince Hamlet should marry. But then there's this whole thing where she's actually in love with Laertes and they've been kind of having a secret relationship for a while. It's a lot of fun. But she's very much the Regina George character who we're all kind of just like, please get hit by a bus. We don't like you. But then it turns out, unexpectedly, she is just as deep and just as much of a pawn as all of the other characters in this godforsaken play. I think the most interesting addition, perhaps, is characters that have been added from other Shakespeare plays or history in general. For instance, we've got Peter Quince from Midsummer Night's Dream. He is kind of the Deus Ex Machina character. He is initially the only other character who was aware of this time loop. And he serves as a character who you're able to kind of go to and say, hey, any insights? And turns out he's got some secrets of his own. We also have Othello from Othello. He's there for some reason. He owns a tavern in town. Apparently Hamlet is set a few years before his own play. It's weird, but honestly, it works. And then perhaps my favorite addition. We have Captain Grace O'Malley. She is the pirate who kidnaps Hamlet, and if Ophelia takes a path that allows her to be on the ship, Ophelia as well. And then you have the option to start a relationship with Grace O'Malley. Tell me that's not interesting! I also guess by that logic that means that Ophelia is also bi, which I think is pretty rad, personally. On top of the plot itself, the game is just beautiful to look at. It has this 3D animation that you play in, but the characters have these beautiful artistic portraits. The game, the prologue and the epilogue both have these beautiful oil painting type art pieces that depict what's happening. It's just a beautiful game. The developers did a really incredible job, and it really serves as a great homage to the original source material. I, being a confident English major, started this game assuming that I would be finished with it in a couple hours, max. Let's just say that's not what happened. Every single right decision I made led to a consequence. I would often try to warn the characters of what was happening, and I would just be met with skepticism. And the worst thing of all is it became apparent that failure was necessary to actually gain information that I needed to try again at a successful attempt. Meaning that in order to utilize information that I got on Saturday that would have been really great to have on Thursday, I needed to die. Which, as someone who expected she could solve this whole thing in an hour, was humbling, to say the least. I think this goes without saying. I am about to spoil this whole game. So if you're not about that and my little elevator pitch got you interested in this game, go to Steam. The game is $10. Get the game, play the game, suffer like I have, and then come back and watch this video. If you aren't really interested in this game and just want to hear me talk about it, then let's keep going. The general plot of the game just involves running around Elsinore and the surrounding town, trying to get information that can be useful, all while avoiding assassination from one of Norway's spies who has been tasked with killing Ophelia in order to make a dent in the Danish court and cause some chaos. This spy turns out to be Lady Brit, which is fun. You know, the person who hates you most in the castle, apparently, is also the same person who's gonna stab you at any moment. Gotta love that. Different interactions lead to different endings. not doing anything out of the ordinary, kind of just rolling with the original plot, leads to the events just playing out as usual. Britt kills Ophelia and throws her body in the river, and everyone else meets tragic fates. There are initially only 3 characters aware that a time loop is happening. Ophelia, of course, Quince, and the ghost of King Hamlet, who is trapped in his own time loop. This leads to many interesting interactions. Along the way, Ophelia manages to learn about the former king, Hamlet and Claudius's father, and his wife Queen Astrid. It turns out infidelity runs in the family. There is a lady named Simona who is Astrid's sister, and it is very much believed that she killed Queen Astrid in order to get the crown and her husband. Does that sound familiar? It is speculated by most of the inhabitants of Elsinore that she has been dead for a while, but based on information from both Quince and inhabitants throughout the kingdom, she's still living in town. Quince is also looking for a book that allows him to travel through stories. It's been missing for quite some time. He agrees to help Ophelia get out of this horrible time loop that she's stuck in, essentially, on the condition that she tries to find his book and bring it back to him. Now, as you might have figured out, Lady Simona is the one who has the book. However, in order to get to town while she is there, which is only on early Sunday afternoon, you need to stop or delay the invasion before it happens on Sunday morning. This involves befriending Lady Britt, which involves dying at least once. Remember what I said about how you're gonna have to die to be successful at this game? This is specifically the instance I was talking about. Eventually, when you're able to get to Othello's Tavern on Sunday morning and wait there for Lady Simona until the afternoon, the lady arrives and you confront her, and she reveals that she was once in Ophelia's exact same situation, trapped in a time loop that she had the power to get out of by making a choice, but Quince was in control of this time loop. That's right, the Deus Ex Machina is actually the one who caused this. He's the big bad. Who could have seen this coming? Full disclosure, I definitely didn't see it coming, but once I found out, it was pretty obvious, you know? She was able to get the book away from Quince and choose her own ending, which was killing her sister and taking over the kingdom, essentially, and she suffered greatly for it. And she's kind of just been holding on to this book for the rest of time in order to keep it away from Quince. She's willing to give Ophelia this same chance on the condition that she keeps the book out of Quince's hands, just like she already has. Because if he gets it back, he'll just go wreak the same havoc on other people in other stories. After this conversation with Lady Simona, she gave me the failsafe of this whole game, the Book of Dionysus. The book includes all the possible endings to the Hamlet storyline that I can choose from as long as I've already played that particular storyline. I'd done it! I'd won the main plot of the game! I did it! One slight problem. All the endings were bad. Like, they weren't all downright terrible, but none of them were the shiny, happy, perfect ending that I wanted. So naturally, I just stopped playing the game. What was the point? My ending didn't exist. Why bother? I mean, to be fair, my ideal Hamlet is that Hamlet apologizes for being, the worst. They're able to get rid of Claudius, and then they get married and live happily ever after. Everyone else is fine. And while there is an ending along those lines, it's not great. Ophelia seems really unhappy in this scenario, and it made me realize maybe my idea of a happy ending actually comes at the expense of my own protagonist. Maybe rather than focusing on making the whole plot perfect, I should just try to make it better? But better for who? Ophelia, Denmark, Hamlet himself? No, definitely not Hamlet himself. I delved into my Ophelia self-insert fantasy a little further and thought to myself, would I be content with a picture-perfect ending, with no catches or excitement? Honestly, no. That's not how life works, and that's certainly not how a Shakespearean tragedy works. I don't know if you've ever read a Shakespearean tragedy, but they're not great. So what comes after my making Hamlet perfect phase, which is now officially over? Perhaps the self-care phase? Perhaps the best possible outcome for Ophelia specifically? Perhaps the best possible outcome for Denmark as a whole? Or maybe just the ending that's easiest to swallow and causes the least amount of collateral damage? That meant that I had to look at all of the different endings and determine which one is the best for my girl Ophelia, and perhaps decent for everyone else. Which meant that it was time to play the game again, after quite a bit of time. Definitely longer than the couple hours I thought it was gonna take. I was finally able to play through most of the game, or cheat and look up spoilers. After experiencing all the different endings, I feel confident in my ability to analyze each one and determine which one has the best possible outcome for everyone, which one has the best possible outcome for Ophelia, and which one has the best possible outcome for me. Once again, spoilers. Big, big spoilers. If my elevator pitch didn't get you, but everything that came after it did, go get the game, play it, come back. But if you simply don't care, let's press on. So I'm just going to go over these endings in no particular order. First, we've got Sacrifice, Struggle for Relief. This is just Hamlet. This is just a plot of Hamlet. However, interestingly enough, it's different than the plot Ophelia was living. There's no spy who's going to murk Ophelia in order to wound the court of Denmark. In this ending, Ophelia simply accepts that this is the way things are meant to be, and she drowns herself. So this isn't great. This is actually the exact problem we were trying to solve. So we won't spend much time here. That being said, she does do it in sort of a, screw you, Quince, this is the way things were meant to be, I'm taking control of my life back. Which is what people interpret her suicide to be anyways. So there's that. It's also implied that in the long run, the destruction of Denmark was actually a good thing, because it allowed Norway, Sweden, and Denmark to be united in peace. So, like, dead Ophelia, eventually happy Denmark? It's an ending. That's all I have to say. Sacrifice, Permanence for Passion. In this ending, you befriend Othello, and you aid him in a time of need. Because of this, he falls in love with you, and offers to take you away from Denmark and go to Venice. Now, if you know the plot of Othello, you know that his story ends with Desdemona and a cushion. This is still the case, as Hamlet is apparently set several years before Othello happens. But the choice is still yours, even though you know this. Yes, this is the one time Quince is, like, really useful. He does say, hey, just so you know, you can totally go with this guy, but he is gonna leave you in a few years, and he's gonna kill his wife and end up dead, and it's a hot mess. But, like he says, the choice is still yours. And if you do go with Othello, things go pretty much as expected. You go to Venice together, you get married, and you live several happy years together. Othello joins the army, Ophelia works as a serving maid, and they have a pretty decent life together, until Othello meets Desdemona and leaves Ophelia. But beyond that, Ophelia still managed to have a pretty decent life, all things considered. She really admits that she loves this life, and is happier in Venice than she ever would have been in Denmark. Her one regret is that she kind of just up and left her family with no explanation, and they never really find out what happened to Denmark. But Ophelia doesn't really care about Denmark anymore. She just does very well for herself in Venice, and she's fine. She's happy. And that's what we're trying to go for, right? I really like this ending, It made me sob. Sacrifice prestige for family. In this ending, Quince ends up performing a play that depicts Polonius's death instead of the murder of Gonzago. Due to this, the family ends up leaving the royal court. They're just given some land in a small castle at the edge of Denmark, and they end up living a quiet life and they take care of each other. It's far from the luxury that they had in Elsinore, but it's not bad. Ophelia is able to grow closer to both her father and her brother, and learn more about her mother as Polonius is finally comfortable enough to tell her kind of what happened and how incredible her mother was. So it's actually a really great situation for Ophelia's family. However, conditions are a lot harsher in an old drafty castle that hasn't been touched in a long, long time than they were in the nice cushy castle of Elsinore. So Polonius dies, and it causes some issues for Ophelia personally. She becomes incredibly bitter with the people in Elsinore for being the way that they are and causing her and her family to need to leave to save themselves. She eventually does heal. She and Laertes eventually find spouses and fix up the old castle. It's not perfect, but in Ophelia's words, it's something like happiness. For Ophelia, I'd say this is an average ending. Not great, not terrible. We once again don't learn much about the fate of Elsinore, but considering the family still lives in Denmark, we can say that Denmark as a whole is probably fine? Question mark? I'd say this ending is mid. Sacrifice predictability for adventure. This ending is wild. Essentially, you convince Claudius to send you on the ship to England with Hamlet and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and do the whole kidnapped by pirates thing. Ophelia joins Grace O'Malley's crew. Remember? The hot pirate that you can sleep with? That alone should get you jazzed. She just lives the pirate's life. Drinking, stealing, selling goods, befriending the crew, having a found family. Gosh, I wish that were me! 3 years of glorious romantic piracy. But I guess since this is still a tragedy, the British get involved. We love it when the British get involved. The ship is ultimately overtaken by British privateers, and the crew are killed one by one. This includes Grace and Ophelia. Ophelia does end up expressing that she wishes her life had been longer, but she really enjoyed what she had. She lived an adventurous life that she never really thought was possible for someone like her. Overall, Ophelia seemed content, happy, and free in this ending. I love this ending. I wish they could have been happy pirates for 50 years, but I can accept that there is tragedy involved. But I still got pirates! Sacrifice family for legacy. This is the ending that I mentioned earlier. You manage to keep Hamlet grounded and he kills Claudius early on, and it's kind of just brushed under the rug. No one really finds out what happened. But he decides to be a sensible person after that, and he ascends to the throne. And then you get married! Also, Polonius and Laertes get banished. Because Hamlet doesn't like them or trust them. So, this is the ending where you literally give your family the middle finger to be with Emo Boy. Why did I romanticize this so much as a teenager? It's also implied that the only reason the powerful nobles are even allowing this marriage is to keep the Danish line on the throne. So Ophelia will be watched like a hawk for the rest of her life because they don't believe she's good enough, simply because of her birth, her bloodline. She's a biracial woman and also far, far below the stance of royalty. She hates it. She's very candid about this. Also, Hamlet isn't a strong ruler. Ever. He's basically a figurehead puppet that is being manipulated by all of these old, powerful nobles. The only really positive thing about this marriage is that there's love involved. There's a lot of love involved. Hamlet adores Ophelia, but she wonders if that'll ever be enough to make her happy. Unlike most of the other endings, this is one of the few in which Ophelia doesn't express lack of regret. She just says that she hopes she made the right choice, implying that she's always going to wonder, what if? This ending pains me. I want it so badly to work, especially because Hamlet really does put in the work to be a better man and right his wrongs. He really loves Ophelia and is willing to fix himself for her. On paper, it sounds like a great ending. In practice, they're young and under the thumbs of greedy, powerful men. I do like to think that if circumstances were different, if Ophelia and Hamlet were just two ordinary people, they could have been really happy together. Just not in this world. Sacrifice peace for survival. In this ending, Ophelia is able to convince everyone that an invasion is coming and they need to defend themselves. They succeed and they're able to capture Prince Fortinbras, but he is a prince, so they do have to eventually send him back to Norway. But then Sweden, of all places, decides, hey, if Norway can invade Denmark, maybe we can too. And then they invade Denmark. This starts a war between all three countries, and it's terrible. War goes how it goes. Everyone suffers. Ophelia and her family just watch the royal court get consumed by war. They're not able to focus on how much they hate each other anymore, because they're at war. Hamlet and Brit do get married in an effort to bolster spirits and gain money from Brit's very wealthy family to assist in the war effort. Ophelia is set to be married off to a man that she does not know and does not want to marry, but luckily for her, he's killed in the war like a week before. All in all, the overall backdrop and mood is just bleak. But this is the only ending where the entire court at Elsinore survives, just at the expense of the lives of the innocent citizens. That doesn't sound familiar at all. Ophelia is definitely unhappy, but she doesn't admit it or care, just because she's the reason everyone's alive. She fixed it, right? It's almost like this game was invented specifically to call me and my naivety out personally. Anyways, this ending blows. Next slide. Sacrificed reality for joy. I'm going to preface this by saying that this ending is super creepy and super uncomfy. I'm gonna spoil myself here and say that this is easily the worst ending. Basically, by announcing that you are trapped in a time loop, whether you do it in a play or you announce it from the top of the castle walls, people think you're crazy and they put Ophelia in an asylum where she gets to have lovely, joyful fantasies where everything is perfect. She and Hamlet are getting married, Brit and Laertes are getting married, her father is happy and alive. Claudius and Hamlet put aside their differences and became friends. Ophelia just manufactures this perfect life for herself and for everyone else. But it's all fake. It's like swallowing spoonfuls of hot, sugary syrup. For a brief moment, she remembers the horrible life she's subjected to in this asylum, but she quickly pulls herself back into the madness-induced dream, convincing herself that the asylum is fake, and this happy, flowery world is what's real. Then she repeats the exact same monologue that she said at the beginning about how lovely her life is as the screen fades to black. It's creepy. I hated every second of it. If you even look at this ending, the ghost of King Hamlet appears to you and says, hey, maybe don't do this. It's creepy and it sucks. That's how bad this ending is. You essentially have ghosts of dead ancestors say, hey, don't do that. I don't want to spend any more time on this ending. It sucks. Don't do it. Do not do it. Sacrifice responsibility for indulgence. So in this ending, Ophelia realizes that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have the right idea. They travel everywhere and just have fun, and they don't worry about anyone but themselves. So they all end up leaving the castle together before the you-know-what hits the fan. And Ophelia doesn't care what happens to Elsinore. She just wants to have fun. She's suffered enough. So rather than think about her plight and how horrific everything was, she just turns to alcoholism. Which, relatable. But she can't ever shake the guilt of essentially just leaving everyone to die. Which they do, as they learn through the grapevine. Fortinbras took over and just killed everyone in his path. Eventually, the guilt and the addiction just consumes her. She's realized that she's not given herself freedom or taken back control. She's just put herself in another cage. She expresses this to her companions, and it prompts them to start a new adventure. They settle down. And that's it. We get no other resolution. We can only assume that it's a big gay throuple, and Ophelia just lives in self-loathing for the rest of her life in a house in the suburbs. Ophelia falls, Denmark falls. This is depressing, let's move on. Sacrifice innocence for power. Gosh, we have not had a good one in a while. Let's talk about this one. Ophelia becomes a very effective Queen of Denmark because everyone else is too stupid to do it clearly. Honestly, good for her. However, now hear me out. In order to get to this point, hear me out, she has to marry Claudius. I know it sucks. Essentially, the way you get this ending is you tell Gertrude something that makes her sad, like that her dead husband is deliberately not appearing to her, and she throws herself off the castle walls, giving you the chance to swoop in and take her man. Wow, this is really the third time this has happened, all in the same family. Therapy really should have existed back in the olden days. I think it would have solved a lot of problems. So, Ophelia takes political matters into her own hands, gives Fortinbras the tiny patch of land he is willing to invade a country over. And she's very girl boss about this interaction, by the way. Just, man. Here, take your silly swamp and get out. Gosh, am I the only one around here with sense? She's able to pretty much solve every gripe everyone has, while all the other countries just continue to tear each other apart. Denmark knows peace because of Queen Ophelia. The catch? Ophelia kind of just becomes a cold ruler. She doesn't really care about her own personal life anymore, because she's lived in a hell where she has had to watch everything she loved cease to exist over and over and over again. She essentially uses her knowledge to build Denmark into a constitutional monarchy. Again, girl boss. It's great, aside from the fact that people at court don't like Ophelia very much as a person. Again, because of the whole cold, distant ruler who was only queen because a bunch of people died and she married the king we don't even like thing. But she doesn't really care. Sure, she's not happy, but she's also not sad. She doesn't feel anything anymore. All she wants is to make Denmark the best it can be. It's very much got the vibe of life was garbage, so I threw myself into my work. Life is still garbage, but work has never been better. You feel a little for her in this ending, but this is by far the best outcome for the country as a whole. Also, it's easy to get over the whole marrying Claudius bit because Ophelia is so badass, he essentially just becomes unimportant. He becomes Ophelia's husband. Again, girl boss, just at the cost of human emotion. Sacrifice everyone for myself. This ending is fairly basic. Ophelia leaves Elsinore before everything completely falls apart and ends up staying at her father's old manor for a time, until she receives a summons from the new Queen of Denmark, Lady Brit herself. Apparently, that whole plan went well. concerned about how fate might treat her, given that she and Britt have a rocky time loop history together that consists of murder at worst and friendship at best. She simply runs away again. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? She goes to the country of Navarre, where her mother is from, and builds a life there. She's content here. It is somewhere where everyone looks like her, everyone accepts her, everyone befriends her. She lives a really great life here. She does often think of how everyone met their demise and Denmark fell into Norway's hands, but she's glad to be alive and in a place where she belongs. It's a pretty solid ending. It's not spectacular, but it's not as horrible as some of the others. Sacrifice independence for peace. In this ending, Hamlet is able to avenge his father and kill Claudius, but at the price of Denmark's independence. That being said, Hamlet isn't really a good king on his own anyway, and actually does quite well with Prince Fortinbras's guidance. They become really good friends, and Denmark, despite not being Denmark anymore, actually fares quite well. Britt and Hamlet are married in order to make this alliance official, and Ophelia manages to find someone as well. A Norwegian soldier who very much admires her, and they become very good friends. But then Polonius kind of ruins everything and says, "Hey, daughter of mine, did you know that you are dating the king's little brother?" That's right, Ophelia dates Fortinbras's little brother Ferdinand. And because of this, she's really hesitant to fall for him, because, you know, she's dated princes before and it didn't go so great. But she does eventually warm up to him again, and they fall in love, and they get married. And this union is actually blessed by King Fortinbras and Prince Hamlet themselves. And they're really happy, but he is a politician who is actually part of the effort to keep the three countries united in peace. So he's essentially called to Sweden to help there with the peace effort, which means Ophelia has to go with him. She's a little sad that she's losing her old life, but understands that things don't really stay the same, and looks forward to the future with hope. I actually really love this ending. It was completely unexpected, but it felt authentic. It acknowledges that Hamlet and Ophelia, in their world, really aren't a good match, but they can still hold a fondness for each other. It also introduces a very gentle, understanding man who Ophelia can just be herself with. It even acknowledges that Fortinbras is not the bad guy. We do this thing where we make him the bad guy, when in reality he is just foreign Hamlet with a backbone. It's just a really peaceful, lovely ending that still feels true to the original story. I honestly think that this might be as close to a perfect ending as we can get, as far as the original source material goes. Sacrifice choice for revenge. This ending is interesting, because it involves getting both Hamlet and the ghost of King Hamlet involved. You tell them that Quince is evil and has trapped everyone in this time loop, and you're able to hatch a plan. But this is the ending that once you start down this path, you can't go back. You lose the option to use the book. There are lots of point of no return warnings that are going to pop up and say, "Are you sure this is what you want to do?" I wasn't actually able to play this ending because of this reason, but it is more of a secret ending than an official ending. In this ending, Ophelia doesn't pick an ending. She burns the book and in the process kills Quince. In a way, it's foggy, it's complicated. But this traps her and Quince in the time loop forever. Every 4 days, they relive the same events over and over again, although Elsinore kind of just becomes a backdrop. Over and over again. Just going at each other's throats. He hates being trapped and begs her to give him the book and pick an ending and let them both go. she refuses, for obvious reasons. Ophelia is essentially sacrificing herself here because she knows that if she just ends her own torment and gives Quince the book, he's going to do the exact same thing to other people. It's implied that because Ophelia has picked this path, Quince is going to do anything and everything in his power to try to get that book away from her. It describes some really gruesome stuff, including that she is very brutally murdered at some point by both her father and her brother. It's a shocking ending, to say the least, but it is the only ending in which Quince gets his comeuppance, which is nice, and it also makes Ophelia into a hero, but at the price of her own future. It's pretty dark. So if you're a fan of the hero sacrificing themselves for everyone else's sake, it's great. But if you want a happy ending, you're not gonna like this. Exeunt all. This is the final ending, and you cannot get this ending until you've experienced all of the other endings. This is often seen as the true ending, but it is also kind of Ophelia's villain arc. After seeing so many different outcomes for Elsinore and its inhabitants, she stops seeing them as people and more as puppets and playthings. And she grows bored with playing with them. And because of this, Quince offers to take her to other worlds and other stories. She finally sees the world the way he sees it and sees people as just things that you can analyze and play with. She becomes Quince's equal, as she puts it, which means that she's just like him now. They go to other worlds and use the book to pick people apart, essentially. It's through these inhuman acts that Ophelia understands things on more of a long-term, we are but a blip in the lifespan of the universe sort of scale, and she sees human life as just trivial and meaningless. It's a pretty dark ending, but Ophelia does seem enlightened, to say the least. It's a cool meta thing where she realizes all the world's a stage and the men and women merely players, but literally. Which, I guess if I realized that I was a character in a tragic play, just used as a plot device and then thrown away, I'd be pretty mad and go dark too. So that's it. That's all the endings. So now I can decide which ones are arguably the best for the entities that I mentioned earlier. Ophelia, Denmark, and the tiny 17-year-old girl in me who doesn't know that her perfect ending sucks yet. Obviously, there are some endings that are pretty freaking terrible, so we don't even need to think about those. Looking at you, Joy. Personally, I think the best ending for Ophelia herself is sacrificing permanence for passion. It's the ending she seems most excited about, even though her fiery romance doesn't last long, and it really breaks her heart when it ends. She ends up falling in love with her life and herself afterwards. Her only regret in this ending is not saying goodbye to the people she loves. But I think for Ophelia, this is everything she never knew she wanted. A passionate romance, a chance to escape Denmark and see the world, and a chance to just be herself without the little nitty-gritty confines of being part of a court. And if we want to give Ophelia what's going to make Ophelia happiest, I think this is the path to choose. For Denmark, the best ending is easily innocence for power. Ophelia is a super incredible leader and politician, and because of her reign, Denmark has never been better. This isn't the best ending for her because it leaves her as a shell of the person she once was, but for Denmark, it's a really great way to go. They keep their independence and they just become a powerhouse of a country. I honestly think that this is a super cool ending because, first of all, it shows that women can be really powerful and effective leaders if they're given the chance. And it really upturns our expectations for who Ophelia is supposed to be. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, my favorite ending. If you were paying attention, you probably already know what it is. it's Independence for Peace. This was a super unexpected ending. I did not expect this to be my favorite ending, but I think it provides my angsty inner teenager with what she actually wants. I didn't want Ophelia and Hamlet to get married. I just wanted both of them and everyone else to be happy. We don't really know how happy Hamlet is, but he seems fine, all things considered. He got his revenge, he sort of got to be king. He just didn't end up with the girl he likes, which, quite frankly, that's pretty realistic, all things considered. But it also makes Ophelia happy in a way that I would have never seen coming. It gives her as close to a fairy tale ending as you can get in a Shakespearean tragedy. She gets to be herself, she gets to fall in love, and she gets to see the world outside Elsinore. A lot of people may argue that Denmark essentially surrendering and becoming Norwegian territory isn't great, but honestly, I don't care about Denmark. And as seen in many of the endings, neither does Ophelia when push comes to shove. So this feels like just the most natural and satisfying conclusion, and that's why it's the one I ultimately chose. Although I will say, the pirate ending does hold a special place in my heart, specifically for Grace O'Malley, pirate wife. But alas, I don't love the whole only being pirate wives for 3 years because of the freaking British thing. So we gotta go with Independence for Peace on this one. So, as it turns out, you can fix the plot of Hamlet, just not in the way you initially wanted to. Isn't modern fanfiction and game development amazing? Anyways, I think I'm satisfied. I think I can finally close the book that is my Hamlet phase. We all know that's not happening. I'll see some new production of Hamlet in 2 months and be back on my bullshit. Thank you for watching. Again, if you are interested in playing Elsinore, you can find it on Steam for $10. I highly recommend it. It is a super easy game to play. It's just point and click. Pretty much anyone can do it. And if you're interested in seeing all of the endings according to Ophelia, but not interested in playing hours and hours of the game, there is a video that does have all 13 endings, and I will link that in my description below. I recommend watching at least a couple of them, just for the beautiful art and voiceover work. It's truly spectacular. They did an incredible job on this game, just all in all. And feel free to comment below what ending you would have chosen, unless it's the joy ending. If it's the joy ending, don't say anything, and maybe go see a therapist. Anyways, on that note, I will see you next time.